Hello, everybody. As you might have heard by now, it's been the information has come forward that Final Fantasy VII, the remake, is going to be released in an episodic format. So we're going to take a look at this Kotaku post, and it's more of a reference for the discussion rather than a look at Kotaku itself. We all know they suck. But with that out of the way, just kind of want to talk about Final Fantasy VII and what they're doing to the game. Now, my experience with Final Fantasy VII is probably a little bit different than most. I personally started playing Final Fantasy with the original on the Nintendo, Final Fantasy 1, and then later Final Fantasy 2 on the Super Nintendo, which, as we all know by now, is actually Final Fantasy 4, and Final Fantasy 3, also known as Final Fantasy 6. You know, the number system was all screwed up when it was first released, but that's a thing of the past. So yeah, I grew up with those. My favorite, personally, well, I guess my two favorites are 4 and 6. Probably if I had to choose between them, I would probably choose Final Fantasy 6. So I remember buying a PlayStation magazine of some sort. I don't remember the exact name of the magazine. And it featured a big article on, Final Fantasy VII with like the first screenshots and all that. And I got to admit, at the time, I was very excited for it. It was like, I had just completed, well, not just completed, but had come off of playing Final Fantasy VI. I loved it so much, it made me think, oh, Final Fantasy, what a great series. That Christmas, the Christmas that Final Fantasy VII was released, I got a PlayStation, I got Final Fantasy VII, I got the Player's Guide. I had a very good Christmas that year. Probably one of the best ones I ever had. But to be honest, when I played the actual game, it did not, go down as one of my favorite games ever made. Now, that's not to say I hate it, but it's just not one of my favorites. It's playable, but after I completed it, maybe a couple of times, I parted ways with my copy, which is strange for me because I'm somebody that, hoards all my stuff and hangs on to all my video games. But for some reason, I sold off FF7. I kind of regretted it a little bit later on, but that's getting away from the point. The point being that, this is not my favorite RPG ever. It's not even one of my favorite games ever. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible game, but I don't think that it necessarily deserves all the hype that it gets. Now, I definitely understand why people are excited for this. It's for a lot of people, it popularized RPGs. It was their first RPG. They connected with the story, the characters. I can relate to all that because I have a lot of games like that for me. Final Fantasy VII just didn't happen to be one of them. So what they're doing here, finally, after all this time, everybody's crying for a remake, please, Final Fantasy VII, remake it. And it kind of does, I guess, need one in a sense that, you could argue that the blocky, old school polygon, Lego-like graphics from back in the PlayStation 1 days, the early PlayStation days, are very dated. I don't think they hold up nearly as well as, say, Super NES graphics, like the sprite style. So I can understand why somebody might want an overhaul. But the way that they're doing here, I'm not really sure that it's going to be what people wanted. And I feel like part of that is because the way we purchase games now has changed a lot. DLC is very popular. Buying games in episodes is not out of the question anymore. It's commonplace. It's very popular. You have those Walking Dead games that are episodic in nature. But this is Final Fantasy VII. This is a game people know as a complete product, and breaking it up into pieces, it just seems wrong somehow. The world of a Final Fantasy game, it's an entire world map. It's a whole planet. You can get on an airship and explore this whole thing. If you create episodic content out of that, how are they going to make that work? I mean, in Final Fantasy, there was, yeah, stories were linear, but there was also a sense of freedom. You know, once you got an airship, you could go all the way all around the world, kind of do certain quests out of order and whatnot. But if you create an episodic game, portions of that will be cut. It will be a more linear experience, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. They're saying here that, you know, they're going to add in more content. Square clarified that each game in the series is going to be a full-sized game. You know, they go on to say, which presumably means they'll be $60 each, which is kind of crazy. I mean, how many parts are they going to break this up into? We've heard no word of that. But even saying that the game, say they somehow fit it into 3 parts, I mean, they're acting like it's going to be the biggest thing they've ever done. So let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, that they're going to somehow break it into 3 parts, all right? That's still $180 for a game. Seems just slightly ridiculous. You know, what they could be doing here is they could be going back to the old school route of the PS1 and putting the game on multiple discs. You know, they were able to do it back then. I see no problem as to why they can't now. Let's see. This is actually from the Square Enix producer. One thing that we wanted to be clear about during this weekend to accompany the new trailer was the scale of this project. We wanted to tell you this now and not in the future, so that you'd share our vision for what we want to deliver. The biggest reason why we haven't done a remake until now is because it's a massive undertaking to reconstruct Final Fantasy VII from the ground up with the current technology. I guess I can believe that. Producing a proper HD remake of Final Fantasy VII that maintains the same feeling of density of the original would result in a volume of content that couldn't possibly fit into one installment. We've seen everyone's comments and reaction to the news that Final Fantasy VII Remake will be a multi-part series, and many have speculated correctly as to the reason why we have made this decision. If we were to try to fit everything from the original into one remake installment, we would have to cut various parts and create a condensed version of Final Fantasy VII. We knew none of you would have wanted that, but for some reason, he thinks that we want a multi-part series. I gotta say, I was probably going to play this game until I heard that they were going to break it up into multiple parts, because I'm not invested enough in FF7 to go and purchase each and every part. And it seems silly to me that they are breaking up an RPG that is a complete story in and of itself into multiple games. Now, the title of this article is, Let's Think of the Final Fantasy VII Remake as a Totally New Game. Well, why should we do that? It's not a new game. It's an old game. So it's already has an established canon, and people want to see that remade. You know, I'm sure there are some people open to a complete reconstruction and are happy about this, but I feel like, from what I've read around the internet, that the vast majority are very skeptical that this might be the ruination of their favorite game. And in some sense, that's an overreaction, because you can always go back and play the old thing, the old original, but people want to experience this updated. You know, they don't necessarily want all these new features. You know, real-time combat, I don't understand how that's going to work when you have multiple party members. I think the turn-based really does lend itself best to an RPG where you're controlling multiple people. For instance, you got Dragon Quest Heroes. It's like an action RPG recently for PS4 and PC and whatnot. And it feels to me like you can switch party members, but you switch them on the fly, and it's a little bit weird, because there's no, you know, it's like an action RPG. There's no turns. So everything is real time, and it feels like you're skipping around too much when you have to keep switching back and forth between characters to use their different abilities. So I'm curious as to how they're going to make that work in a way that doesn't feel so jumpy, I guess would be the term I'm looking for. So they're saying, okay, we can add all this backstory and stuff. Well, if they want to do that, why don't they take their time and do it right? It's the problem of the world we live in now, the industry itself, where people don't expect full games anymore. It's almost like I've seen people complain about this. Oh, I miss when we didn't have to pay for all this DLC and shit. And you will see people tell them, "Oh, you're so entitled. You're such an entitled gamer." Well, it's like, how is it entitled to want to buy a product and have that product be complete? There are definitely cases where companies will have created extras before they even release the game, don't put it in the game, and hold it aside for DLC. Let's call that what it is. It's just for profit, and it's a little bit sad that you can't even just have a complete game anymore. So I guess that's my problem. My problem is that they're going to turn it into a bunch of episodes, quite possibly making it very linear and removing the world map aspect. Now, obviously, this is speculation. It's not confirmed. But even so, even if they're not going to do any of that, and it's going to be a great, amazing remake with, the world map, all the humor, everything wonderful that, made Final Fantasy VII the well-loved game that it is, I still take issue with the fact that they're claiming that this couldn't be done in one piece, because you can argue, okay, maybe it won't fit on one disc, but disc technology has come a long way. So even if it couldn't fit on one disc, they could put it on multiple discs, release it the same way they released the original FF7. Obviously, they could do the digital download, and that could be complete. So, narrative destroyed, I guess. But, that's just the world we live in now, where these game companies are going to release, they're going to release their episodic content. They're going to release their DLC because people will buy it. It's expected now. And as long as people are going to buy it, a business is, they're going to do what they do, which is try to make money. So technically you can't fault them for that. But let's just hope that somehow this is saved, because with the way it's looking now, I am honestly not really all that interested in it anymore. It just doesn't seem worth it to me, and I feel like they're just making excuses as to why they can't release it as a whole project. And thank you for watching. That's it for now.